Die Gedanken sind frei.
My thoughts freely flower.
Die Gedanken sind frei. My thoughts give me power.
No scholar can map them.
No hunter can trap them. No person can deny. Die Gedanken sind frei. No person can deny.
A program that encourages the open dialogue, consideration, and investigation of a wide variety of ideologies and philosophies in today's society. My name is Irene Scharf, and as a member of the Bexar County Historical Commission and the Helotes Historical Society, I have been asked to serve as moderator of a three-part program series on the Freethinkers who had an important historical impact on San Antonio and the Texas Hill Country. The time period for these Freethinkers in Texas was approximately from 1845 until 1865. Tonight's program is the first of a three-part series which will look at the background of this remarkable group of people and why they chose to come to Texas. The second program will view the lives of these people in Texas, and the third program will delve into the Civil War events and impact that it had on their lives. Our guests tonight, who will serve as panelists, include Catherine Faringer, who has been the program producer for Freethought Forum for over 9 years. She is an outstanding woman who has been recognized in a recent book called Women Without Superstition. And there's a chapter devoted to Catherine called Catherine Faringer, the Lone Star Activist. Next, we have Greg Crowder, who is a noted historian of the Freethinkers from the Texas Hill Country. He's director and past president of the Comfort Heritage Society and also a member of the Kendall County Historical Society. He's a fifth-generation owner of the historic Ingenhuet store in Comfort, and I believe it's the oldest continuously operated general store in the state of Texas. He's a graduate of the University of Texas and also a seventh-generation descendant of early Texas Freethinkers. Then we have to my left Ed Scharf, who is a retiree from the Federal Civil Service and also a state-licensed real estate broker. He has been researching the Freethinkers in Texas over the last 2 years in preparation for a historic marker. He's also active in education and water affairs. So let's begin tonight's program with a definition of freethinker. What do we mean by a freethinker? Catherine?
Yeah, that's what I've been trying to educate people about for these 9 years. Freethinker actually is a person who does not accept any dogma of any church. Also, it's an umbrella term for people who don't wish to identify themselves as, say, atheists or agnostic, rationalists, secular humanist, whatever. There are so many other things. We all go under this umbrella term very well. So it serves a useful purpose. People tend to think of us as being militant and bad people generally, and that's the thing I'm trying to say. You simply do not, I don't know how anybody ever tied morality to the Bible. It's so full of so many immoral acts that it boggles the mind. All you need is a good working brain, and you can figure out a way to behave. And that golden rule thing, which has been knocking around long before Jesus arrived on the scene, is a very good thing to live by. And I think all the freethinkers that I know live by it and are very nice people. They're also, one more thing, they're very engaged in doing things. Every freethinker I know has some kind of project, a community activity that he engages in. I don't know one person that doesn't pull his weight in society, but we never get any credit for that because we don't go under as a group from, say, a Methodist church or a Lutheran church or whatever. So that about it.
Do we know anything about the historical origin of the term?
Yes, we do. Actually, some people would relate it to when you're born. You know, you're born without any preconceived notions or philosophies or ideas, and then as you grow up, they're pounded into you or You absorb them from your parents or community type of thing. So I'd have to say, if many of us had religions, had that type of thing happen to us, and those that, in my case, I was a Lutheran, almost encouraged to take up the ministry, actually, and until I started reading the Bible. And I had to read it twice to believe what I was actually reading, and then all of a sudden I became, I guess what you'd call a born-again freethinker. I reverted back to, I think, cleaning the mind or the intellect. Catherine, in my research, I want to go to your definition for a moment, if I might, for freethinker. One or two of the authors of these freethinkers in the Texas Hill Country say the freethinkers and intellectuals settled that country, the Hill Country. Mm-hmm. And then I look up the definition in the dictionary for an intellectual, and someone that uses their intellect, their mind, they think. And that was these people, and I don't know how to distinguish the difference between a free thinker and an intellectual. Because to be a free thinker, you almost have to be an intellectual. You have to use your intellect and think.
Well, one would think so, but there are people who are so knowledgeable in so many ways and do so much original thinking until it comes to that subject of religion, and then it's like a block of cement in their head. They will not dislodge it. I once made the mistake. I called a man who had written a very fine letter on evolution to the paper, and I thought, oh, he's one of us. I mean, everything he said in it, and I thought, he's one of us. I need to get to know him. He wasn't in, so I left a message. He called me back, and we were chatting away, and I did not quite approach it. I was working up to it. And then, out of the blue, he suddenly said, well, although I'm a Catholic, I certainly go with evolution. It's just ridiculous not to accept it. And I thought, oh dear, well, that was almost a boo-boo. So it is possible to be extremely smart and extremely thoughtful about many, many things and still have that obstacle to overcome, which is that thing your parents and society did to you when you were little.
Called blind faith, basically.
Yeah,
today.
Blind faith.
Now, taking it from through history on free thinking, there have been many encounters with people trying to overthrow the dictatorships, monarchies, which were often allied with religion or used the church to control people throughout history. Beginning I'm going to start with the 1524 to 1526 period, during what was called the Peasants' War in Germany. This was only 7 years after Martin Luther tacked up the 95 Theses on the church at Wittenberg, I believe it was. The peasants decided they had had enough of the dictatorships, in probably 25 or 30 different little principalities that were Germany. Germany was not a unified nation, as we know it later. We call it Germany, but hey, there was Prussia, there was Württemberg, there was Hesse, there were Bavaria. All these different groups had all their own kings and dukes and rulers, basically, controlling it. And each of those rulers dictated what the religion of their area would be, basically. They were all Catholic until Martin Luther, a throwback from or continuation of the Holy Roman Empire. Then Martin Luther came along with his daring doctrine and said, wait a minute, this is where Lutheranism or Protestantism started off in 1517. Well, in 1524, the peasants took a note from Luther's push to have a revolution and said, hey, we need a total revolution. We need to revolt against all these dictators that are controlling our lives. And it spread from central Germany all the way up into northern Germany. Primarily those areas that Luther had success in converting, or getting the princes and kings to convert their people to the Lutheran doctrine. All of a sudden, one day, yesterday you were Catholic, now today you're Lutheran. Everybody in the land. Because remember, the rulers owned and built and owned the cathedrals and the churches in Germany. The poor peasants made one fatal mistake. They went to Luther saying, hey, we could use your help in our revolution, in overthrowing, and getting some democracy, getting some freedom, liberty for us. Luther said, no, y'all don't do this. Y'all back off. They wouldn't do it. And then so Luther authored a publication to all of the leaders, the dictators, and said, really, best you smite them down and stab them like mad dogs. Those are his words out of the encyclopedia, the World Book.
See, morals and religion.
Which is exactly what happened. 100,000 of them were smitten down and stabbed like mad dogs, you know, by the armies of the dictators, the kings and the princes.
Well, freethinkers come in all ethnicities, but today we're focusing primarily on the German freethinkers and what prompted them to come to Texas from Europe. Greg, as a descendant of some of these early freethinkers, can you tell us a little bit about the conditions that existed in Europe at the time that contributed to their wanting to immigrate to the United States?
It's obvious things were pretty horrendous at the time in the old country. People not only suffered from lack of personal items such as food and shelter, things of this nature, but I think what was even more important to them was their lack of political and mental freedoms. They were desiring all of these things when they sought to come to the New World, to America, and start a new life. I had one ancestor, for instance, that spent 2 years in prison for a book that he wrote, which, looking back, was I don't think very radical at all in its reasoning and content. But all these people, and many of them put it down in their diaries, especially on the trips over here, that they were looking for various basic freedoms, and this is what they wanted to ensure in the new world and the environment they wanted to bring their children up in.
Can you tell us a little bit more about this revolutionary book that one of your ancestors was
Well,
imprisoned
I'm
for?
talking about Professor Ernst Kopp is the individual I'm talking about, and he had several college degrees, but he was very young when he wrote it. And first thing he did, I don't really want to delve into the book at great length, but the first thing he did when he got out of prison after a period of almost 2 years was gather his family, sell out his holdings, and bring them to America. And there were many others that spent time in prison during that period too. And as Ed was talking about relative to the earlier period, it wasn't just the poor people in this case. It was also a lot of people with good educations and careers that also started feeling this way about wanting a revolution, wanting to change things from the top down.
Of course, we have a discussion going in this country now on the First Amendment rights, and it's a continuing battle, it seems, over what constitutes free speech. And this sort of historical perspective, I think, makes us more aware of the importance of free speech and free thinking.
Very much.
So, would you like to continue on how the settlers came?
Right. Can do. Greg was absolutely right when he said, you know, it wasn't only the intellectuals. You know, there were college professors, there were doctors, physicians, and the lower class of nobility, basically. You'll see a lot of barons, believe it or not, some dukes, counts, that were settling, you know, in the Texas Hill Country, you know, in the area we show, you know, on the board there. You know, what set a lot of this in motion, in my opinion, was the American Revolution. You know, they say the forefathers supposedly founded a Christian nation here, which the forefathers seem to deny in the Treaty of Trent. But those people that came over, you know, from Germany here and settled in the Texas Hill Country, they tried to take a page from the book of the American Revolution, which the French successfully did about 12, 15 years later with their revolution in overthrowing their dictatorship. The Germans almost, 35 or 40 years later, beginning in the 1840s, like Greg mentioned, there was severe economic depression going on all over in all the states of Europe at the time. There were a tremendous food shortage. There was starvation going on in Germany, believe it or not, a tremendous famine. along with it, then, I think we had that intellectual core that we were talking about that felt a severe depression as far as political and religious freedoms were concerned, too. And many of them came over before what was the revolution erupted in 1848. And we had there some, what was called a Society of 40. It was a group of 40 intellectuals in Gießen, Heidelberg, and I forget which other city, university towns, that had banded together, and they had talked to Prince Salms, who led the settlement of New Braunfels. And Prince Salms had set up glowing terms about the settlements of New Braunfels and then later to be Fredericksburg, telling what tremendous freedom opportunities abounded here in Texas. So that Society of 40 decided they're going to get out of Europe just before the Revolution. They came over in 1847, you know, and we'll touch on later on some of their settlements. They'll also find what Prince Salms and the land developers didn't tell them, that like the Fredericksburg area was going to be right in the middle of the Comanche territory. Comanches, most feared Indians, you know, Native American Indians in the world, that had swept down from the plains. Even the Apaches feared them. And that's what they were sending some of these intellectuals or these freethinkers and many of the German farmers that they were bringing over, you know, into that same hostile territory. But later Baron Moisebach, as we'll touch on, made a very good thing, treaties with the Indians and what have you. But now this was a different group of people. They weren't paid to come over, you know, given money like by what was called the Adelsverein, a group of noble, well, 5 princes of sovereign states, along with 16 lower noblemen, primarily barons, counts, and dukes, got together and decided, hey, we've got a tremendous problem here in Germany. And this was just before the Revolution began, probably about 1842, and decided we need to get a lot of these people out of Germany. We need to get thousands of people out of Germany, basically. It was too overcrowded, no food, no jobs. And between 1840 and 1860, I think 1.5 million Germans total migrated to the United States, of which about 30,000 in that number came to Texas primarily for the New Braunfels and Fredericksburg settlements. But in with that group, some coming earlier and some coming later, after you were saying one of your relatives released from prison, you know, for writing what they thought was the bad book, but it was really, you know, it was when you talk about democracy, freedom, and justice, can't be all bad.
Right.
I wouldn't think so, but...
But hey, if you happen to be the ruler,
yeah,
you know, the absolute authority,
stuff.
and somebody's saying, hey, how about democracy?
Yeah, what a neat
well, you would
idea.
say throw them in jail.
Of course.
You know, you can't stand that kind of...
Well, comfort was actually settled by freethinkers, was it not? The
Very
early
much
settlers?
so, right. It was almost predominantly founded by freethinkers. And I might add to what Ed was saying that the universities and schools played such an important role in the old country between the ties and the communications within the groups. With respect to the people that came to Comfort and Sisterdale, which was nearby, many of them had known each other in the old country. Some of the more intellectual of the group had gone to school together, universities together, and in some of these cases that's where they formulated their ideas, refined them, and also where many of them produced their writings. And later that would serve in Texas as additional ties.
And why was Texas particularly attractive to these German immigrants as opposed to other parts of the United States?
Well, there were, not only did the Texas climate and terrain remind many of them of their old country, but there were several books that were...
Is it that hot? I don't think so.
Well, part of this was a new German state they wanted to... Germany actually had designs on setting up a Neue Deutschland.
Oh.
Remember, Texas was not part of the United States then.
Not
There,
till 1845.
there were several books, though, that were written and
Republic.
promoted highly in Germany at the time, and a lot of people read them, and as Ed mentioned, they gave a glowing
land of milk and
representation
honey.
of Texas. Mhm.
Can I ask something here? Because
Sure.
we're talking about intellectuals and people of refinement and taste and culture, and they come over to Texas in 1840-something. I can hardly hack my way through something now in 1997.
a good
Come
point.
on. I don't know. Did they know? Did they have any idea what they were getting into? I look at some of that rough country sometime and I think, oh, you brave people. Brave or crazy, I don't know which.
I think they were very, for the most part, very naive about what they were
Yeah.
getting into.
Well, and they were desperate, I think, to get out of Germany.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well,
You
and there
know.
were so-called Latin communities that were formed here.
Yeah.
And they were sort of a utopian experiment.
But
You know,
who helped them with, they didn't particularly bring anybody who was good at hoeing and weeding and chopping trees and stuff like that? I'm always very practical. I ask these questions all the time. How did they, you'd think they would have died immediately, first time they set foot in this.
Well, I know many of them brought music, their
Yeah, they brought
instruments, they brought their
elegant-
libraries,
yeah.
elegant furniture, etc.
Fine
And-
paintings, silverware.
I mean,
in a
like they were going to have a
frontier
mansion to
setting.
move into when they got here.
They were definitely idealists, very
They had to
much.
become realists very quickly.
Oh, very quickly.
And I've
Yes.
heard, I don't know if it's substantiated, that both the Comanches and also the Mormons taught them how to farm and taught them some of the
Okay,
practical
some
skills.
they had
Yeah,
some
that's,
help
that's
then.
Is that
definitely
true?
true, yes.
Well, I don't know whether they were freethinkers, but it seems to me a long time ago I read about some German immigrants. They were sort of bamboozled over here. They were told that all it was so wonderful, and they bought passage and they came in at Galveston, and then that trip was over. That was it. Find your way wherever you wanted to go. But they dropped them like a bunch of hotcakes, and they died. A lot of them died on the way to try to find some place to, I guess, establish a permanent location. But do you know anything about that at all?
Yeah, not so much the freethinkers that died. They pretty
No,
well.
these were-
But
these were
of
the-
those 30,000 German farmers that were settled in first New Braunfels and later up in Fredericksburg, the Verein didn't realize, or this nobleman's society, I guess we might call it in Germany, that Prince Salm was their agent to set up New Braunfels first. They didn't realize the hardships they would encounter. They didn't allow enough money,
Yeah.
and they did leave a lot of those poor farmers, you know, who they paid passage for.
Oh, they did pay it. I
Yeah,
thought they
but
had to buy
not the,
their
not
own.
the group, the 250 families of intellectuals or freethinkers that we're talking about. They pretty well took care of themselves. We need to separate those out.
Yeah.
But those 30,000 poor dirt farming families, you know, that came over, many of them were left setting down at Port Lavaca, Indianola, Indian Point, whatever they called it, near Galveston, or that area, and where there wasn't money at the time to bring them up, or they ran smack into the Mexican-American War,
Yeah.
where Zachary Scott, was that the general at the time?
I believe so, yeah.
Confiscated all, later to become president, later took over all the wagons, and there was no way to move so many of those people, you know, that Prince Salms was bringing over to set up New Braunfels. They were left stranded, and a lot of them did die down on the beaches.
That's mean, but I think of these intellectuals that survived so well. Wasn't that nice? And how it's just, to
Well,
me,
fortunately,
miraculous.
most of them came after New Braunfels was established, and they were
Yeah.
able to travel through New Braunfels and learn by the mistakes of others to a
Oh,
large extent. Yeah.
Well,
And then we have the example of Baron von Moisebach, who actually concluded a treaty with the Comanche Nation, so that
yeah, they
there was
got
a
on quite
peaceful
well, didn't
settlement.
they, with the Indians, the Freethinkers did. See, hot dog, brownie points for us.
Stories are also told about how the Indians would look in on some of the Latin communities' discussions. As I understand it, they'd meet maybe once a week at somebody's house and have intellectual discussions and social, and the Indians were amazed at
Yeah, earlier, I guess it was
speaking in Latin.
earlier this year, Fredericksburg celebrated the 150th anniversary of the signing of that treaty.
They had descendants of, I believe, the Germans and Moisebach family, and also the Comanche
And the natives, Native Americans.
leaders.
Now that was no easy feat for some. Moisebach, most suspected would never come back alive. That was 20 different Indian chiefs you're talking about getting together. You can't even get two freethinkers to agree on anything. Now here are 20 Indian chiefs from different tribes that might even war on each other, And the pictures, you know, the artist's drawings of that meeting first show him going there, and they couldn't believe his flaming red hair and beard, which was very impressive. And some of the squaws took him down to the stream and tried to wash the red out of his hair and his beard, and then they were amazed that it wouldn't come out. So then
Did they think he was a god of some kind?
evidently,
Sort of like
you know, I
Cortez
would think
riding
so,
out
Greg.
Definitely different. Something interesting, ever since I was a young child, I've always heard it said that that was the only treaty between the white man and Native American that had never been substantially broken in the history of this country.
That's right.
And I've never seen any evidence to the contrary, so I think that's really a unique
Achievement.
situation.
It certainly is. Well, now this Sisterdale bunch, what about them? Because that's sort of what we're talking about. Aren't they the ones that had, or some of the ones that had the Latin meetings and...
There were a handful of so-called Latin communities, and Sisterdale really was the only one that achieved any extended period of success. A lot of the residents of, or a number of the residents of Comfort grew out of those that originally settled in Sisterdale, was influenced very much by the community. Ed, you want?
Well, how is free thinking hanging on now in these times as compared to those times? What's happened to the ancestors of these people?
I think there's been sadly, I think there's been a gradual decline over the many years, and it happened in stages. There were different events that marked each stage or subsequent stage, such as when the railroad came to the area. That greatly diluted, you know, the local population with newcomers, and it was shortly after that the first church was founded in Comfort.
Yeah, it went 40, how many years, 2 or 3?
Yeah, 38 years after Comfort was officially founded before they started the first church. And I've always felt like the railroad coming had a lot to do with that.
I'm sure it did.
Yeah.
Now, 38 years from the founding of Comfort, but if you go back to like the old Sisterdale communities, the
Much longer.
Castell, Bettina, the very first group that Dr. Herff of the famous Herff physician family of San
Yeah,
Antonio,
yeah.
many
That
generations
sounds
there.
familiar.
He actually brought over that first group of 33 of that original group of that they called themselves the 40, the 40,
Oh,
and they settled. We'll probably talk more about this in the next program, but that was the first group that came over in 1847. That was 7 years before Comfort. And then in the meantime, Sisterdale and the others developed. So it was almost, what, 45 years before a church was even built in the area. As a matter of fact...
how many do they have now?
You can count them on one hand, at least in Comfort.
But
there
Comfort
aren't
still
that
isn't
many.
incorporated, is it?
No, it isn't, and
Or are you looking toward incorporation with
Well,
the invasion from the south?
I think it's come up a few times, but obviously the majority is still opposed to it. Has never come to a vote yet in the community. So.
I think that shows a strong free-thinking mindset. You know, here, we're from the Helotes area. It has about the same population as Comfort, and they've got all kind of government. The little village we live near of, what, 500 people, they have to have a very energetic government, and I mean, sometimes causes a lot of trouble, unnecessary taxes, and
A lot of diversity
but now
And
you're
division.
and division, right?
Yeah.
Well,
now
it's just
Comfort's
at
been in
least
the
two
news
sides
lately
for
about
issue.
all the San Antonians wanting to move there because it's such a great place to live, and what's the first thing they want to do?
Change it.
Set up a government. Build bigger and better churches. What was interesting about no church in the area for maybe some 45 years, now I'm talking about the whole free-thinking hill country community, there were a couple of accounts where I think the Episcopalians and the Methodists tried to send a missionary into the area. So
That concludes our series for this evening. It went by so fast, but we hope that you will continue to join us for the other two sections.
Die Gedanken